The contamination on some of the parcels that we found are so hot that the kids just walking over it is enough to raise their lead levels to extreme highs. And some of these parcels we're at over 217 times the allowable limit. And just walking over that land can be really toxic.
Is there any answers to why, if it was known, why were these built on top of this contamination?
I think what we're going to expose is people who put greed over health, personal politics, all right, over safety. I think that's what we're going to discover. Somebody somewhere, like they did in Flint, fudged some numbers, didn't release a report, gave a green light here, and to have 360 residences demolished by January 1st. They want to demolish it all. That's a huge loss to this community. And I think in the process of finding out who made the decision, we need to equally make sure you can't do it again.
If we get the ear of Governor Pence, which that's the goal, what's your message?
My message to him is we need help, and we need it right away. We need water, we need housing, we need more than a Section 8 voucher. What would you do if it was your children that were in this situation? How fast would you move if it was one of yours? So I feel that we deserve the same urgency with the lead and arsenic, and we just need help.
You look at most of these situations where you're having these contamination problems, it's in low-income and minority communities. Do you see any problem with, they feel like they're being pretty much left held up to dry.
Yeah, well, this area is heavy industrial. There's a lot of industry here. This site, they're in the footprint of a former lead facility, and that's, I think, why we're seeing such extreme levels in this specific area. This site, I believe, closed maybe back in the 50s or 60s, and I don't know the policies back in the 60s, how they operated, but I'm sure, they were probably looking to build public housing on land that was relatively inexpensive.
Indiana discharges 30% more toxic industrial waste into its waterways than any other state in the union. In fact, they discharge more than 26 states in the union that represent 100 million people. We're basically a colony of Chicago, and kind of give you an understanding. Chicago metropolitan area has a population of about 7.1 million. That's more than the entire population of Indiana. So we serve their markets. And so where we have very lax environmental regimes, this is a way in which we can provide space for these industries to operate. A lot of the corruption here, to understand this, is you have two of the wealthiest industries in human history here. You have oil and steel, and BP and ArcelorMittal are two major heavyweights. And that's in a tiny, tiny little town of 27,000 of low-income community of color. These industries do not allow a local election to interfere with their profits. So when it comes to an election cycle, money hits the street like you wouldn't believe. That has very relaxed gun regulations. A lot of those guns that are utilized in Chicago shootings have been purchased down here.
But to the point of this story, the raw materials they need in Chicago, they get those raw materials from Indiana where it's much cheaper.
Right. It's an open door policy for industry. And industry is running roughshod over the lives of the people here.
People of color, unemployed, undereducated, living in poverty. There's a pattern here. And we can't lose sight of that, particularly when it comes to environmental injustice. These bad actors know what they're doing when they're doing it. They know the right spots. They know the communities where they can just about get away with it. There's just something evil about that.
They allowed them to be, houses to be built on here because it's low income. They're not concerned about who was living on it. It's low income, so they know the majority of it would be the minorities.
When it comes to the mostly white-bread communities in Indiana, they simply don't experience the kind of impacts from industry that we do. But they have a greater voice in state legislation and stuff like that. So when we complain of the mistreatment up here, they're just thinking, oh, you're just a bunch of colored people on the North Shore, or the Northwest Indiana.
That's right, and they don't need healthy environments.
I think it goes beyond that. I think they blame the victim for their own living conditions, and they don't blame their own decision makings that allow these industries to practice the way they practice here.
Had this been a more wealthier neighborhood, this wouldn't even been happening, because for one, they wouldn't have built, somewhere for you guys to come and live. They wouldn't have built no little high rises that are worth billions of dollars. out on this contaminated field.
Back then, I think the values they were operating on was trying to address what they would have thought in that time was and this is in the era of urban renewal, the black problem in their minds, and pushing them out of where valuable land was and pushing them into lesser valuable areas.
So they thought it was less valuable, but they didn't really understand it was poison.
You know, I think everybody knows it's poison, but one of the things that happens with funding networks is you don't research what you don't want to find. And what we have here is a known risk, building something on a lead refinery. We really didn't want to know the information for a long, long time, and we really have to figure out what forces did not allow us to characterize this land thoroughly enough to realize the risk that we really knew was here, because we knew this was on a lead refinery. We knew it was so risky that we put a 40-foot tall canoe over the other one. So we knew that there was serious risk to a lead refinery.
Yeah, in 95.
In 95, right.